Although there's simply no way to show everything that CSS is capable of in one chapter, I do want to give you an idea of some of the options that you have when styling elements. We're going to start by exploring some of the things that you can control around styling text. So here we are in chapter 6 again, the 06_04 folder. I've opened up the type.html just so you have an idea of kind of what's happening on this page. We have a heading that says HTML and CSS, and then 3 paragraphs below that. So we have an H1 and 3 paragraphs, and we're just going to control some of the basic typography on the page. So I'm going to go up to my style element, and I see that there's already one rule in place, and that's the body rule, which is affecting everything within the body. And I can see that I'm setting the width of my page to 70%, and then I'm doing this little trick right here, which is margin. Now, margin is the space between elements. And by saying margin 0, we're saying set the margin to 0 to top and bottom. First value when you use 2 here is top and bottom. And then right and left will be auto. And that basically means center the page, if you will. I want to focus on the heading 1 first. So I'm going to go ahead and create a selector for the heading 1. And I'm just going to go ahead and create my opening and closing curly braces there. And now I'm going to start creating some properties for these. Now, in this one, we're focusing on typography or basic font styling. Now, the first thing that you can control that most people want to control anyway is the family. Which font am I using? So to do that, we're going to do font-family. And you're going to see that a lot of the font properties have the word font, a dash, and then what you want to change. Now, for the font family, we're going to set a specific font. And in this case, we're going to say Georgia. Now, what's really interesting about this is that you can pass in a comma-separated list of fonts. So I could say Georgia, comma, and then in quotation marks, because it's more than one word, Times New Roman, and then another comma, and then Times, and then finally serif. Now, what's going on here? Well, basically what I'm asking a browser is, do you have Georgia? And if the browser says no, I say, well, okay, fine, give me Times New Roman. And if it says, well, I still don't have that, I say, well, okay, one more time, give me Times. And it's like, nah, I don't even have that. So that's when you're at your wit's end and you say, fine, give me whatever default serif font you've got. These are fallback fonts, and it's basically saying if my first option is not available to me, give me another one. And you can have just one font if you want. You can have multiple of these. It's always a really good idea, however, to at least give it that default family. Give me serif or sans serif or cursive or monospace so that it knows sort of what style of font you want in case it doesn't have any of these. Okay, now after font family, I'm going to do font-size. You could, if you wanted to, express this in pixels. 50 pixels, 40 pixels, 16 pixels, that sort of thing. On the other hand, I'm going to use ems, and I'm going to say 2 ems. Okay, so what is an em? An em is a relative unit of measurement. We live in a very relative world these days. You don't know if somebody's going to be looking at your site on a browser or on a phone or tablets, obviously, but I've even seen a stove that had a browser in it. Or what a relative unit of measurement does is it says, make this size relative to whatever your default font size is. So for a phone, that might be 6 pixels. For a browser, it might be 16 pixels. So by saying 2 ems, you're basically saying give me twice whatever your default is. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say font weight, and I want font weight to be normal. Usually you're looking at either bold or normal there. Since headings are almost always bold by default, if you don't want them bold, you have to explicitly set font weight to normal. And finally, I'm going to do font style, and I'm going to do that italic. So you can italicize by using font style. So weight handles whether it's bold or not. Style handles whether it's italic or not. If I save this and preview this back in my browser again, you can see that it changes the formatting. The size stays about the same because 2 ems is very close to the default size of most heading ones. And it's no longer bold, the font weight's normal, and the font is italicized. We're going to continue setting font properties for our paragraphs. So I'm going to go ahead and create a selector for the paragraph, which would be P, and use the opening and closing curly braces as well. So every single selector looks exactly the same except for the characters you use for the selector. We're going to do the same thing for paragraphs. We're going to do font family. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that, paste that in there. Save myself just a little bit of time there. Next, I'm going to do font size again. And for paragraphs, I'm going to do a 1em size, and that's basically saying whatever the default font size is on your user agent, give me that. And then I'm going to set a property we haven't done yet, which is line height. Line height is line spacing. And then I'm just going to do 1.6. Now, that's not space between paragraphs. It's space between the lines within the paragraph. 1.6, that's using a multiple. You could use pixels. You could even use ems there. But by using a multiple, That's 1.6 times whatever the size of the font is. So about 160% of the size of the font is the amount of line height I'm getting. And then finally, you might want to also control alignment of the text. We have a couple of options available to us in CSS. We can do center alignment, we can left align it, we can right align it. We can also justify. So I'm going to do justify, which is going to justify the type so that it's neither right or left aligned. It's going to be solid on both sides. So if I save this, and again, preview this again, notice that our paragraph text gets a little larger because we told it to be 1em. We've got the line spacing going on, and we have this justified text as well. It's not too efficient to have to keep doing the same thing over and over again. And if you have to define a font family for every single element that you're working with, that's not very efficient at all. So one of the things I want to pass along to you here before we move on is the concept of what's known as inheritance. So if I go up to the body, and let's say I take this font family declaration, and I just cut this out of the paragraph selector, and then I paste it into body. Maybe I want it to be something a little bit different. Maybe I say Arial, Helvetica, and then we'll do sans serif. So now if I save this, what I'm saying is for the body element, which is this little guy right here, I'm saying everything inside there should be Arial. That means that I've just globally told my entire file, I want your font to be Arial. Now, what's really interesting about CSS is these interior elements can then overwrite that. Instead of trying to define the font on every single element, what I'm going to do is define it once on body, and then anytime I need it to change, that's the only time I have to declare it. So now if I save this, and once again go back into my browser and preview it, you can see kind of how that works. The heading is Georgia, but the body is Arial, even though it's being set up here on the body. I just want to set a couple more properties here, and then we'll move on. I'm going to go back down to the paragraph, and I'm going to change the paragraph's width to 60%. Width is a property you can use on just about any element. That's going to control, as you would imagine, how wide it is. Now, this 60%, I could have used pixels, I could use ems, I could use any unit of measurement I want. But when you use percentages, what that's doing is it's saying, hey, go up to the body and give me 60% of whatever the body is. In this case, if I save that and preview it, you'll see that it shortens that considerably. So even though the body is taking up this much room, by saying 60%, I'm just saying not quite all the way to the edge of the page. This creates a more readable column. And then the last thing I'm going to do is control the spacing between these lines. For the headings and paragraphs, all the browsers have default margins that they put between them, and that controls how much space is between them. Well, if you want to take control of that yourself, you can use margins. For the heading 1, I'm going to do a margin, and I'm going to set that margin's value to 1em, 0, and 0.4 ems. Margins, you can do shorthand. Notice here I'm passing 2 values, here I'm passing 3. When you pass 3 values, this is the top, this is left and right, and this is bottom. So I'm saying give me 1 em's worth of space above the heading. Don't give me any margin left and right, but give me 0.4 ems on the bottom. Now if I save this and preview it, I want you to watch this spacing right here. You can see it added a little bit of spacing above it and took away a little bit of spacing below it. I'm going to do the same thing more or less for the paragraph. All I'm going to do for paragraph is this. I'm going to type in margin 0. Now what that would do for me is it would take away all the spacing in the paragraphs. You can see there's butting right up against each other. Now what's interesting is you can have multiple declarations in the same rule. So right after margin, I could come down here on the next one and say margin dash bottom and explicitly set a bottom margin to say 1em. Now if I save that and test it, I can see that that bottom margin is restored, and now I'm only spacing paragraphs from the bottom of the paragraph and not the top of it. If you feel a little overwhelmed, don't. Now remember, this isn't a CSS course. The main purpose of these exercises is to show you a little bit of what CSS is capable of and to expose you to the syntax so that you'll have a head start when you begin learning CSS in earnest.